Hello, welcome to the Belief Show. I'm
Thank
especially I'm especially thrilled that we have you on today. And our audio is kind of funny. That can happen. We're gonna ride it out. We're gonna hope for the audio to do wonderful things. It's like we're starting all over again.
We'll go for it.
Welcome to the Belief Show. I'm thrilled that you're here. Let me tell everybody a little bit about you and then we'll get started. So about Melissa Benaroya. She is a licensed therapist in Seattle. She's a parent coach, a speaker, and an author. Melissa provides parents with the tools and support they need to raise healthy children and find more joy in parenting. I am thrilled to speak to Melissa today. Hi.
Well, I'm excited to be here with you. Thank you, Sonia.
So we'll start with some silly questions. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
That's a good question. There were several things that filtered through, but I think one thing that I stuck with for a very long time is I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals and I was always bringing home strays every time I saw an animal wandering or loose in the neighborhood.
That must have been an adventure for your parents.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Still love animals, have my own, but not operating on them.
What is one of your favorite foods?
I think one of my favorite foods is pho, which sometimes people call pho, Vietnamese soup, which is yummy and delicious. And I've been eating it since I was a kid and it wasn't even popular. We'd go to very authentic Vietnamese restaurants because my dad was a very adventurous guy.
How often do you think you eat it?
Now I probably eat it at least a few times a month.
That's so cool. I love it, but I just don't kind of go out of my way to eat it. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. And then high school can be a challenging time. What was a good part of high school for you?
I think leaving high school and going to college was the best part of high school for me.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on the Believe Show. I'm thrilled that you're here. We have had some parenting experts, but actually very few. So I love that you said, look, I'm going to talk about the negative effects of rewards, and we want to take it right there. So I will start with Melissa. What is it that you believe to be true that others may disagree with you about?
Yeah, so I think that rewards actually have the opposite effect of what parents actually want them to do, which is generally getting their child to do something by manipulating them. And it may work in the short term, but I think in the long term, it tends to backfire. When the rewards go away, so does the behavior. I'm sure you're familiar with the classical conditioning of Pavlov's dog or the Skinner box, where they trained rats with positive and negative rewards. Our children are not rats or dogs. They are human beings, and we're trying to nurture qualities and characteristics in them. And by using rewards and bribes and even threats, we end up manipulating them. And so we don't nurture those qualities we want in kids. And we also teach the art of negotiation, which backfires because one of the biggest complaints I hear from parents is my kids always trying to negotiate with me. Like I can never just ask them to do something. And that's because we taught them that skill. They were not born with that skill. So I think rewards and star charts and bribes are really just a crutch that, honestly, we've all used at one point or another, but really should not be a tool in our parenting toolbox.
So I'm dying to ask you what we should do instead. But first, I want to ask, how did you come to this belief?
Well, I have two of my own children. And so I think a big piece of this, in addition to my training as a therapist and positive discipline and growth mindset, is just kind of listening to my own gut of like, it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good using these ways of getting my children to do what I want them to. And it's frustrating that they're actually not learning the important role of being responsible or taking pride, really learning the importance, the lessons behind those things that I need or want for them to do. So I think a lot of it was just kind of my own gut feeling of like, this just doesn't feel good to me.
And how old were your kids when you made the transition away from rewards to what you're going to tell us about?
Yeah, I think they were pretty young. They were probably like toddlers, preschoolers. Yeah, I think they were pretty young when I figured this out for myself. Like I knew it inherently, but you fall back on it. You got to try it out for yourself. And I just learned really quickly, like it just didn't feel good.
So for all of you who are with us, any questions that you have, just type them into the comments and we will give these questions to Melissa. I have a bunch and I imagine you do as well. Melissa, what should parents, all parents, what should parents do instead of rewards?
Yeah, well, I think, honestly, Senya, there's a whole host of things that we can do. I think being intentional about having a handful of tools will make it easier. Just in parenting day to day and inviting kids' cooperation. I think when I work with families that threats and bribes is kind of part of their daily arsenal. I think transforming those moments and making small tweaks can make a big difference. And one small tweak that I suggest is using something called an enforceable statement. And an enforceable statement simply focuses on what I'm willing to do or what I'm willing to allow. So not telling the child what they need to do, because when we do that, we're ultimately engaging in a power struggle, but saying things like, I'm happy to listen as soon as your voice sounds as calm and respectful as mine does, right? Instead of, I'm not going to listen to you, or I'll listen to you when you do this, right? We get into this kind of negotiation or consequence. It shifts the dynamic a little bit. So I'm not threatening you. I'm not bribing you. I'm just focusing on what I'm willing to do and allow. And you as the child have a choice of what you get to do. And you can't be frustrated with me because I told you what I'm willing to do or allow. So another example of this is I'm happy to take kids to the park that have cleaned up the toys in the family room. So that way, if kids make the choice not to clean up toys in the family room, then we miss that opportunity. And it's not me dangling in a carrot or threatening that we're not going to do something. It's just creating a more level playing field. And at the same time, I'm not backing myself into a corner of saying and doing things that I'm not going to do or don't really feel great about. So it kind of shifts things where the focus is on what I'm willing to do or what I'm willing to allow. And the child gets to make choices, and then they get to learn from those choices.
It sounds like you're not saying to the parent, don't set up expectations at all. In fact, you're saying set up expectations. So it sounds to me like you're saying it's okay to have the same expectations, that the living room gets cleaned before we go to the park. But don't make it sound like the park is a reward or not cleaning is a threat.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's not something we can control. Like we can't physically force them to do things. And many times as parents, we get into this dynamic where we do and say things where we just actually don't have control, right? A lot of it usually is around eating and sleeping. Like we can't force our child to eat and sleep, right? There's a handful of things associated with the child's body we just can't control. And many times we tend to throw out some of these empty threats, which then basically communicates to our child that we don't actually mean what we say. So it encourages them to continue to push and push and push.
So Melissa, since you mentioned it,
go ahead.
I'm going to bring up a topic that I know a lot of parents talk about. In fact, a friend of mine posted on Facebook once something like, can putting your kids to bed give you PTSD? So let's talk about bedtime. What is a way of setting your own expectations when you really want the kids to get to bed? Say there's a bedtime that you want them to get to bed at, and say they already know what the routine is and what they're supposed to do. But what is that thing that you say?
Yeah, well, I think a few things. I think number one, having clear agreements ahead of time, really key. And when I say clear agreements, this is an agreement you make with your child. You don't tell your child what time they're going to go to bed. We have a conversation. So it's partly their idea at the same time. We're going to invite greater cooperation when they're part of the conversation. So I think starting with the clear agreements we create together is a good starting point. I think another tool that's really helpful in inviting kids' cooperation is using limited choices. And I'm using the word limited to start because there has to be a limit first, right? And then we can offer some choices within those limits. So this is a place where we can share some power and control with our child, because children are always looking for power and control. And in doing so, they're going to be more willing to do those things we need for them to do. So maybe the limit is, hey, we need to be in bed by 8:30 tonight. Do you want to brush teeth right now and have 20 minutes to read together, or take your time in brushing teeth and see how much time we have left to read books? It's totally up to you. So once again, we've given them the choice. If we get to 8:30 and it's taken 15 minutes to get the teeth brushed, bummer, like we only have 5 minutes, right? So we're holding the line, we're focusing on what we're willing to do, what the limit is, and they get to learn from their own choices, their own actions. So they can't get mad at us. They learn from these situations. So the next night, so it might not change things for that night, but the next night, you bet they're going to be more motivated to just get that teeth brushing done so they can have the time they want with their parent.
So you said it totally makes sense. So I'll summarize. It sounds like, first of all, have a clear agreement in advance. First, such as you and your kids both agreed that 8:30 is the bedtime because everybody needs to get up at a certain time for whatever. So you have that agreement in advance. And secondly, you're saying when it gets some good time before that time, half hour, 45 minutes, give choices at that point so that it's clear what's going to happen in that time.
Yes. And you know what, quite honestly, the more limited choices we can give kids throughout the day, the more cooperative they're going to feel. So if you can imagine, every child has a piggy bank that says control across the front. If it's depleted, they're going to be looking for control everywhere, right? Just like if our bank account was depleted, we're going to figure out ways to fill that account as much as we possibly can. And they might not even be great ways that we feel good about, but we got to do it because we got to pay the bills, right? Same is true for kids. They're going to be looking for control all over. But if that bank account is filled, if it's not depleted, they're going to just feel in general more cooperative. So my suggestion is don't wait, actually, 30, 45 minutes before. Be mindful of giving them to children throughout the day. So I think this is a really important tool to avoid some of these big power struggles and escalations that happen. Being mindful that we need to fuel our child's sense of power and control, which is an even bigger issue right now with COVID and the pandemic, because nobody's got control over anything, right? Around school, around seeing friends, going to your favorite restaurant, like it's all out the door. So what I've seen in my private practice is kids are feeling so out of control. The world feels so chaotic that like power struggles are like on fire everywhere.
I want to drop in a comment that the person who introduced us is saying, Eileen is saying, love the control piggy bank. Yeah. I love that too. Yeah. I love that too. And Melissa, as you know from positive psychology, we have this psychological capital that we build up just from seeing friends, talking to friends. So you're also saying kids necessarily have this control piggy bank. So let them build it up. Give them choices.
Right. Yeah. Give them the opportunities, offer them these limited choices, and that bank account will be fueled enough that they're not going to, dig in their heel when it comes to bedtime, because they've had lots of control around other things throughout their day.
So you've said something a couple of times that I want to dig into a little more. You've said, when I set this kind of expectation and I say it out loud, they can't be frustrated or they can't be mad. I just find that happens anyway, even when you make an I statement and you make your own. So could you speak a little about that?
Sure. Well, you know what? Our job is not to please kids. Like, yeah. It's okay that they're disappointed or frustrated or angry. And in those moments, we just empathize, like, it's so hard when you wanted to read 2 chapters in your book and we had time for 1. It's such a bummer. And tomorrow night, no problem. we can get that teeth brushing done and we'll have lots of time, right? So it's our job is not to make them happy, and we want them to get frustrated and disappointed and angry. That builds resilience and grit, so it's perfectly fine, but we don't want to get into the constant head-to-head power struggle, and that's definitely one thing that we can avoid in many situations. Not all situations, right? But in many situations we can.
Let me add one other thing that just comes up a lot when we do these shows on parenting. What about when you do need to do something quickly? So at the beginning you said, okay, sure, a reward may work for short term, something quick. But what if a situation like two kids, both of your two kids are fighting immediately and you kind of want to separate them? What's a good way to speak about it that doesn't use reward or threat?
Yeah, so I think, it depends what the situation is, but I think just calling out very calmly that what's going on is not okay. And once again, I go back a lot to using empathy as a parenting tool of like, uh-oh, what's going on, guys? Like just gently drawing their attention to like something's not okay without putting them on the defensive right away. So many times our knee-jerk response, our emotional response is, you guys quit it, cut it out, right? Like we're having an emotional reaction to our children's emotional reaction. It's so much more helpful for us to enter the dynamic really calmly because our mirror neurons in our brain are firing off and we're replicating one another's emotional state. So we can help them to come back down a little bit faster if we are aware of how we're showing up in that moment. And then this might be an opportunity to step back, let them figure it out, ask if they need help. Do you guys want to figure this out on your own, or would you like me to step in and help you? If we've let it play out for a while, you know what? Looks like the game's gonna end. You guys are feel free to go play in your room separately for a while, or you can get out a different game and try something else. So once again, here's another place where we can offer some limited choices where like whatever's happening right now, like we're putting an end to this. And here's some other things that you can do right now. Or here's what I'm willing to let you do, right? So we can also use that enforceable statement there as well. I think if we have some problem solving skills, sometimes really young kids need us to jump in and help and model some of that for them, or mediate for them a little bit. But I think it's equally powerful and important for us to step back sometimes because our kids are pretty capable. They're more capable than we give them credit for. And so sometimes just stepping back and letting it play out. And sometimes there's, things go badly, and that's okay because they're learning a lesson there too. We can come back and process that with them later. So I don't think there's one right way to deal with things. Sometimes there's a right way for that situation, but there are so many dynamics that can be playing out. So I think one thing to be mindful is just kind of trust your gut on it. Our intuition is pretty powerful, and sometimes we don't listen to it. We're more worried about what other people are thinking that may be observing, or maybe we're feeling guilty about something we did earlier in the day. And I think trusting our gut is a great place to start when parenting.
It sounds like a couple of things, trusting our gut and also staying within ourselves, not being one of the active participants, but staying in our parent role.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Melissa, before we get to our ending questions, where can people learn more about some of your tools? You've shared some with us today.
Yeah. Well, you can find me at melissabenaroya.com, but I also have some online courses and a blog, and those live at childproofparenting.com. So I have two websites. One's just kind of my general coaching and speaking. That's the melissabenaroya.com. And then a lot of the classes and blog. I have tons of free downloads and information on my blog. That's all at childproofparenting.com.
I have just typed those in and sent them to everybody who is with us today.
Perfect.
So coming to our concluding three questions, the last. So if someone doesn't know about this at all, about the things that you discussed, what are some ways to summarize some of your main tools and beliefs?
Yeah, I think that being mindful that there's already a power differential that exists between parent and child, just because like we're bigger than them, we're looking down on them. And that though we're the parent and more of an authority figure, that when we take a more collaborative approach to parenting with our children, we're going to have much greater success in not only inviting their cooperation, but creating the relationship that we want with our kids. We have to nurture that relationship really early on if that's something that we want to build with them for a lifetime. So fear-based parenting does not necessarily build the relationship that most parents want with their kids, but many of us grow up with parents that use fear-based parenting. So be mindful that a lot of the tools from your family of origin are going to surface, but there is so much information and research on parenting and relationships in the last 10 years than there were 100 years prior. I think finding a philosophy, approach, and a teacher that resonates for you, and just stick with that. Don't keep, browsing the internet every night looking for the answers. Like, find something that really resonates and connects with you, and just stick with that and be consistent.
I feel a lot of calm just in the way you're describing it, about being methodical, sticking with something, choosing, just being that consistent parent. That seems very helpful. Okay, our last two questions. For the people who have been joining us today, what is a thought you would like to leave everybody with?
One thought that I want to leave everybody with that I did not bring up today, but I think is relevant to all things parenting, especially during the pandemic, is we actually need to put ourselves first, which feels counterintuitive to a lot of parents. But what I see a lot, just in general, but even more now, is parents sacrificing their health and well-being for the sake of their children. And we're not doing anybody a favor by doing that. So I think being mindful of just small things often that we can add to our day or our week that fuel us will help us show up the way we want to show up, not just for our kids, but for our partner, for work, all of that. It is so easy to write all of that off. And I think we do not put enough time and investment into our own self-care. And if we want to be a great parent, we need to be a great person first and foremost.
Yes, self-care for parents. And we've got people in the comments saying, yes, yes, yes. So cheering on with your ideas.
Totally.
And our last question, if you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what action would you want that to be?
Wow. I think the action I would want them to take is in the moment when there is a big emotion or a difficult behavior. I would love for parents to stop and self-reflect first and check in with themselves about where they're at. So am I escalated? What is my emotional reaction? And self-soothe if I need to, because we are going to get so much further when we are connected to our rational brain with our kids than if we are responding from emotion, which, our brain is wired that way. We have this whole fight or flight response wired in from our caveman brain, and we can't help ourselves. But I think if we all learn to just stop and take a deep breath and focus on ourselves before we focus on our kids, we will get so much further.
That's so wise. I usually, as an interviewer, I try not to comment on the ideas because I think they're so cool, but that seems so wise.
It's so basic though, isn't it? It's basic, it's simple, but it's hard as hell, right? It's so hard. It's hard to do.
Just that pause, right, in that moment.
Definitely.
Go take it. You heard it here today from Melissa Benaroya. Go take that moment for yourself, which actually feeds both the self-care and the being ready to parent the way you want to parent.
Absolutely.
Melissa, thanks so much for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was nice spending time with you. I appreciate it, Senya.
Thank you.